You ever have a moment where time just fractures? Where you swear the world goes silent and your heart pounds so loud it feels like it's in your ears? That was me on a gray Thursday morning, sitting across from Karen from HR and Brandon Nichols, Veridion's regional integration lead, in a windowless conference room that smelled like stale coffee and cheap air freshener. Effective immediately, Karen said, her voice so gentle it felt insulting. Your base salary will be adjusted to better reflect market standards for your revised role. Then she slid the paper across the table. I blinked at it, convinced I was reading it wrong. 60%. My salary, slashed by more than half in a single sentence. I didn't react right away. I didn't scream or curse or flip the table like part of me wanted to. I just sat there, hands folded in my lap, staring at the number until it blurred. I remember thinking maybe, if I looked at it long enough, it would change. Like the paper would apologize and say, "Just kidding. Here's your real salary." But it didn't. Karen shifted in her chair. Brandon steepled his manicured fingers on the table like some kind of corporate overlord. "This reflects the changing nature of your role," Brandon said in that slow, patronizing way I'd come to recognize in the 6 months since Veridion acquired Helix Dynamics. "Client engagement will be centralized at headquarters, so your responsibilities are transitioning to a support function." Translation: we're taking your accounts, your authority, and your livelihood, but we still expect you to clean up after us. I think the moment that will stick with me forever wasn't the number itself. It was the way neither of them looked me in the eye, as if they were embarrassed for me, or maybe embarrassed by how little they valued 9 years of my life. I forced my lips into something like a smile. "I'll need 24 hours to consider this," I heard myself say. My voice was calm, polite, robotic. Karen's shoulders relaxed. Brandon gave a tight nod, like he'd expected tears or shouting and was relieved I was professional. But the second I walked out of that room, my legs nearly gave out. I must have looked like a ghost as I crossed the open office, this big industrial chic space with exposed brick walls and polished concrete floors that had once felt like a second home. Back when we were still Helix Dynamics, back when we were small and scrappy and believed we were building something worth the sacrifices. I barely remember gathering my laptop and slipping out the side door. My car was parked in the subterranean garage, tucked into the same spot I'd used for nearly a decade. I sat in the driver's seat and closed the door. And then, finally, my composure cracked. I sobbed. The kind of heaving, ugly crying you hope no one ever sees, mascara running in black rivers down my cheeks, my breath hitching in my chest. I cried for the 9 years I'd given to a company that no longer existed except as a line item on someone else's balance sheet, for all the birthdays I'd missed, for the Christmas mornings I'd worked, for Owen, my sweet boy, who deserved more than a mother who might not be able to keep the lights on. It felt like my entire life had just been detonated by one piece of paper. When the tears finally slowed, I leaned my forehead against the steering wheel and tried to breathe. Think, Natalie. I'd survived worse. When Owen's father decided fatherhood was too limiting and took off to Portland to find himself, I hadn't crumbled. When my mom got sick and I was the only one to care for her while holding down a full-time job, I hadn't folded. But this felt different. Because I had believed, truly believed, that Helix valued me. That all the nights I'd stayed late and weekends I'd spent glued to my laptop were an investment, not a gamble. I was wrong. I sat there for 45 minutes, replaying every late night, every missed soccer game, every tiny moment I'd traded away thinking it would mean security for Owen and me. The worst part? Even then, some desperate corner of my mind was trying to justify staying. Maybe I could make it work. Maybe we could get by. Maybe they were right. Maybe I wasn't worth what they'd been paying me. But even as the thought formed, Another part of me flared up. Fierce. Defiant. No, I wasn't going to accept this. I pulled my phone from my purse. My notifications were a mess. Emails, Slack messages, reminders about tomorrow's meetings. My thumb hovered over the call icon. There was only one person I wanted to talk to. Hannah Liu. We'd started at Helix Dynamics the same month, hired as client managers back when we were in that converted loft space with the peeling paint and the cheap folding tables. We'd been the last two standing when Veridion came calling. Until Hannah left 6 months ago to join Orion Technologies, Helix's biggest rival. She'd tried to recruit me then, but I wasn't ready to jump. I still thought I could save something here. Now, as I scrolled to her number, I knew that was a fantasy. I pressed call and held the phone to my ear. It rang twice. Then Hannah's warm, familiar voice came through. Natalie. And just like that, I knew I wasn't alone. Natalie? Are you okay? Hannah sounded out of breath, like she'd sprinted to answer. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. For a moment, I thought I might start sobbing again, right there in the garage. Hannah, I managed finally. They just offered me a 60% pay cut. Her sharp inhale crackled in my ear. What? Are you serious? I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. I'm serious. Brandon Nichols from Veridion called it a realignment. They're moving client engagement to headquarters. They want me to stay, take on a support role, and apparently do it for less than half my salary. That's disgusting. Hannah's voice dropped to a fierce whisper. I knew they'd start pulling this crap, but I didn't think they'd be this blatant. My eyes drifted over the cracked concrete of the garage. A memory bubbled up from the early days, back when Helix Dynamics was still just a big idea in a little building. I'd joined when there were only 15 of us, jammed elbow to elbow in that drafty loft on the north side. We were all 20-something optimists who believed we could build a platform that would transform how mid-sized companies manage their digital infrastructure. I'd been a client manager then, making less than 40 grand a year and working 80 hours a week. But I didn't care, because it felt important, because we were a team, because the founders promised we were building something bigger than ourselves. I thought about the ping-pong table someone dragged up those narrow stairs, about the cheap beer in the break room fridge, about the time we all pulled an all-nighter to meet a funding deadline, then watched the sunrise from the roof, bleary-eyed and exhilarated. It felt like another lifetime. Hannah's voice pulled me back. Nate, listen. This isn't about your performance, you know that, right? It's a calculated move. They're trying to push you out without paying severance. I swallowed. I know, it just feels personal, she finished for me. Yes, because it was personal. Every client I'd landed, every contract I'd renewed, every night I'd stayed late to make sure deliverables were perfect. I'd poured myself into this place, and they'd decided I was disposable. I glanced at the clock on my dashboard. Almost noon. I'd been sitting here for nearly an hour. I have to go pick Owen up in a bit, I said, my voice steadier. But, thank you. Just for picking up. Of course. She hesitated. Natalie, I wasn't going to bring this up today, but... What? There are rumors at Orion that Veridion plans to move all your client services to India by the end of the fiscal year. 6 months, tops. The words landed like a punch to the gut. They're already negotiating with outsourcing partners, she continued. They'll keep a skeleton crew here to transition the accounts then. Poof. My throat went dry. So this pay cut is just the first step. I think so, Hannah said gently. They want you to train your replacement and quit before they have to lay you off and pay severance. I pressed my fingers to my eyes. I feel like an idiot. I really thought I was safe. I'm managing our biggest contracts. And they'll let you do it as long as you're cheap and quiet, she said. But the second you push back, they'll walk you out. I exhaled shakily. Listen, she continued, voice firm. You don't owe them anything. You built those relationships. You built their reputation. If you decide to walk, you'll have options. I thought of Owen, of the mortgage payment due next week, of the inhalers lined up on his dresser. I don't know if I can risk it, I whispered. Then just think about it, she said. And check your contract. If you don't have a non-compete, Veridion can't stop you from working somewhere that values you. I ended the call a few minutes later and just sat there. My mind was a kaleidoscope of memories. The week after Owen was born, I'd been back on my laptop, emailing clients from my hospital bed because we were closing our Series B funding. No one had asked me to. I just believed it mattered that much. The year after my divorce, when I couldn't afford childcare and brought Owen to the office every weekend so I could finish onboarding the Meyerson account. He'd nap under my desk with his stuffed bear. All the hours, all the milestones I'd traded for the illusion of security. I started the car. My hands were still trembling. I didn't drive home. Instead, I turned left onto Clark Street and parked in front of the old loft where it all started. It looked smaller than I remembered. The sign had changed and someone had replaced the broken windows. For a second, I could almost see us all there. Young, hopeful, so sure that this was the future. But that company didn't exist anymore. It hadn't for a long time. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. Mascara smudged, eyes swollen, but under all that, something steady was taking root. Resolve. I wasn't going to let them take everything. Not my dignity, not my future, and definitely not my worth. When I got home that afternoon, Owen was already there, sitting cross-legged on the living room rug with a science kit spread out around him. He looked up when I came in, eyes bright behind his glasses. Hey, Mom. Look, my volcano finally worked. I managed a smile. That's amazing, buddy. He launched into an excited explanation about baking soda and vinegar and the perfect ratio for maximum eruption, but my mind kept drifting back to that conference room, to Brandon's rehearsed corporate jargon, to Karen's forced sympathy, realignment. Such a tidy word for what felt like a mugging. I excused myself and went upstairs, shutting the bedroom door behind me. For a few minutes, I just sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my laptop. Then I opened it. I clicked into the shared drive, the project files, the client reports, all the documents that had defined the last 9 years of my life. They all belong to Helix Dynamics now, or rather, to Veridion Systems. But I'd always kept my own notes, the personal details that didn't fit into CRM software. Which CTOs preferred a phone call instead of an email? Who needed extra reassurance before signing a renewal? Which clients sent baby gifts when Owen was born? And who'd texted me during my divorce to see if I was okay? Those relationships were mine. I pulled up my employment contract. The original Helix agreement, signed the week I started. My heart thumped as I scrolled to the section labeled Post-Employment Restrictions. Nothing. No non-compete clause. No prohibition on joining competitors. Just a basic confidentiality paragraph. Standard language about protecting trade secrets. Veridion had forced new contracts on the more recent hires, but they'd never gotten around to updating legacy employees like me. I closed my eyes and exhaled. They think they own me, but they didn't. They never had. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay there in the dark, listening to Owen breathe through his asthma vaporizer, watching the soft glow of the hallway light under the door. I kept replaying Hannah's words. They're going to offshore your job in 6 months. It all made sense now. The sudden redundancy assessments, the pay cuts, the vague memos about global alignment. They wanted me out without paying me a cent. By dawn, the fear had curdled into something else. Clarity. At 6:30 the next morning, I pulled my best navy suit out of the closet. the one I saved for big presentations and contract renewals. I straightened my hair, put on understated makeup, and looked at myself in the mirror. Professional, prepared, unbreakable. At 7, I texted Hannah, "Can you set up a meeting with Daniel McKay today? I'm ready to talk." She replied almost immediately, "He's expecting you. 8:10 a.m., West End Cafe." I slipped into Owen's room. He was awake, sitting up in bed reading. "Hey, buddy." "Hey, Mom." His voice was small. "Are you okay?" I hesitated. "Kids always know." "I will be," I said, brushing his hair back. "Today's going to be a big day." He nodded solemnly. "Will you pick me up after school?" I swallowed. "Yes, I promise." Driving downtown, the streets looked different, like a city I was seeing for the first time. Or maybe just the first time without my illusions. The West End Cafe was quiet, warm light spilling over the tables. Hannah was already there, her laptop open in front of her. Next to her sat Daniel McKay. I'd heard plenty about him. Orion Technologies founder, the man who'd built a billion-dollar platform out of a tiny consultancy. Younger than I'd expected, maybe mid-40s. Dressed in a charcoal blazer over a t-shirt. Clean cut, direct. He stood as I approached, offering his hand. "Natalie, it's good to finally meet you. Thank you for making time on such short notice." "Of course." He gestured to the empty chair. "Hannah tells me you've had an eventful week." "That's one way to put it." I sat down, folded my hands in my lap, and looked him in the eye. "They cut my pay by 60%. Effective immediately. No reduction in responsibilities. And they didn't tell me they're planning to offshore client services in 6 months." Daniel's expression didn't change. "I'm sorry," he said simply. "No one deserves to be treated like that." Something in me almost cracked again, because he sounded like he meant it. "I'm not here to play games," I said. My voice was steady. "I'm here because I know what I'm worth, and I'm done letting them make me feel like I'm lucky to be tolerated." He nodded. "I'm glad you called." I'd rehearsed this moment all night. Every question, every scenario, every potential way it could go wrong. But sitting across from Daniel McKay, I felt unexpectedly calm. Hannah closed her laptop and gave me a small, encouraging nod. "Natalie," Daniel said, folding his hands on the table, "we've followed your work for years. Orion has lost 3 major contracts to Helix because of you. Well, Veridion now, I suppose. Every time, clients cited your name as the reason they stayed." I felt my cheeks warm, but I didn't look away. "I didn't do it alone," I said carefully. "I had a team." "And I'm sure you'll have one again," Daniel replied, his tone matter-of-fact. "Here." He slid a crisp white folder across the table. I hesitated, then opened it. The first page was a job offer. Director of Strategic Partnerships, Orion Technologies. Base salary, $170,000. Performance bonus, up to 25%. Full medical coverage, no exclusions. Stock options, and a signing bonus that was more than I'd ever seen on a single check in my life. My breath caught. This is... I trailed off, trying to process the numbers. More than fair. "It's what you're worth," Daniel said simply. I looked up at him, studying his face. No condescension, no performance. Just someone who recognized value when he saw it. "Why now?" I asked. "You've had other opportunities to reach out." Daniel exchanged a glance with Hannah. "Because Veridion's acquisition has turned Helix into exactly what you never wanted it to be," he said quietly. "Corporate, transactional. You were the glue holding it together, and now they're proving they never understood that." I swallowed. "What about non-competes?" "Your original contract doesn't have one," Hannah interjected. "Veridion never made you sign a new agreement." I nodded. "That's true." "Then there's no legal barrier," Daniel said. And as far as your client relationships, I'm not asking you to solicit them. But if they reach out to you, we won't turn them away." He didn't have to say more. We all knew the relationships I'd built weren't going to stay behind. "Can you start in 2 weeks?" he asked. I thought about Owen's inhalers, about our mortgage, about the nights I'd cried myself to sleep, terrified I was failing him. Then I thought about that conference room and Brandon Nichols's patronizing smile. "Yes," I said, "I can start in 2 weeks." Daniel smiled. "Then let's do this." We spent the next hour discussing transition plans, onboarding timelines, and the broad strokes of what my role would look like. As we talked, the heaviness I'd been carrying started to lift, like I was finally breathing clean air after years in a windowless room. When we wrapped up, Hannah walked me out to the sidewalk. "You okay?" she asked. "I think so," I said, surprised to find I meant it. "Call me tonight," she said. "We'll celebrate properly." I promised I would, then turned and walked to my car. "I'm doing this," I thought as I slid behind the wheel. "I'm really doing this." I didn't go straight home. I drove back to the Helix, no, the Veridion office. My badge still worked. I rode the elevator up to the 5th floor, heart thumping. When I stepped into the reception area, Karen from HR looked up, startled. "Natalie," she stammered, "we weren't expecting you back today." I smiled calmly. "I have something to discuss with Brandon." "Of course. Let me see if he's available." I waited, watching the logo on the wall. Once, that sign had felt like a promise. Now it looked like an epitaph. A few minutes later, Brandon appeared in the doorway to the small conference room. "Natalie," he said with manufactured warmth, "come in." I walked past him and sat down, placing my folder neatly on the table. "So," he began, "have you had time to consider our proposal?" "I have," I said evenly. "But first, I'd like clarification on a few points." He tilted his head, bemused. "Such as? Which team will be assuming the Meyerson renewal next month? And who's handling the Geller Systems expansion?" Brandon's smile slipped. "Those are details we'll finalize during the transition." I folded my hands. "I'm the point of contact on both. Our contracts guarantee named account management. The clients will need to be notified." "Natalie," he said, his voice tightening, "this meeting is about your decision, not about operational minutiae." I leaned back. "Then here's my decision." Brandon blinked. "I resign. Effective immediately." For a moment he didn't speak. Then he laughed, a short, humorless bark. "You can't just walk out. You're obligated to provide 2 weeks' notice." "Actually," I said, sliding my own folder across the table, "per my original contract, Section 12, subsection C, a reduction in compensation exceeding 15% nullifies the notice requirement." Brandon's jaw clenched. "And in case you're wondering," I added, "I won't be transitioning any accounts. The same clause waives all transition obligations in the event of unilateral pay cuts." Karen looked like she wished the carpet would swallow her. "You're making a serious mistake," Brandon said quietly. "No," I said, standing. "I'm correcting one." I stood and gathered my folder, feeling my heart thudding in my chest. For a second, the enormity of it all nearly made me dizzy. 9 years of my life, over in a single sentence. But instead of regret, all I felt was relief. Karen opened her mouth like she wanted to say something, maybe to apologize, maybe to plead, but nothing came out. Brandon's eyes narrowed. "You understand we'll be reviewing your communications if we discover any attempts to solicit clients." "I know," I said calmly. "I've taken nothing that doesn't belong to me, and I won't start now." He stared at me, trying to gauge if I was bluffing, but there was nothing left to bluff about. I turned and walked out without another word. The open office was hushed as I crossed it. My team, what remained of it, was clustered near the glass partition. Maria, Eric, Tasha, all three watching me with wide, stricken eyes. "Is it true?" Maria whispered as I reached them. "You're leaving?" I nodded. "Effective today." Eric looked pale. "What about the Meyerson account? The renewals?" "That's not my problem anymore," I said gently. "But it will be soon." Tasha's eyes were filling with tears. "You were the only reason I stayed this long." I didn't know what to say to that. So I hugged each of them in turn. Then I walked to my desk. It looked the same as it had every morning for nearly a decade. My son's drawings pinned to the fabric partition, the silly, world's best boss mug Maria gave me as a joke, the emergency inhaler I kept for Owen, just in case. I picked up each item slowly, placing them in a cardboard box. My fingers lingered on the framed photo of Owen and me at the lake, a summer afternoon that felt like 1,000 years ago. When I turned to go, security was already waiting. Company policy, high-level departures meant an escort to the lobby, like I'd suddenly transformed from valued leader to security threat. We rode the elevator down in silence. At the front desk, I handed over my badge. "Good luck," the security guard murmured, not quite meeting my eyes. I stepped out into the cold February air, hugging the box to my chest. The sky overhead was a flat pewter, the kind of Midwestern winter morning that seemed to swallow all the light. But for the first time in months, my chest didn't feel like it was caving in. I walked to my car and set the box on the passenger seat. My phone was already buzzing. 4 missed calls from an unknown number. I ignored them. Instead, I dialed Owen's school. "Hi," I said when the front office answered. "This is Natalie Quinn. Can you please let Owen know I'll be picking him up today?" There was a pause. "Of course, Ms. Quinn. Everything okay?" I looked out at the Veridion building. Glass and steel and nothing that mattered anymore. "Everything's going to be fine," I said. When I hung up, I finally listened to my voicemails. 3 were from Brandon. The last was from a number I didn't recognize. "Ms. Quinn," a crisp male voice began. "This is Leonard Huxley, General Counsel for Veridion Systems. I'm calling to remind you that any proprietary information you retain remains the property of the company and must be returned immediately. We will be conducting a thorough review of your devices and accounts. Any breach of confidentiality will be met with appropriate legal action." I sighed and deleted the message. They could threaten all they wanted. I hadn't taken a single file. My reputation was the only thing I carried with me, and they were welcome to try to prove otherwise. You can't intimidate me anymore. I started the car. As I pulled out of the parking lot, my phone rang again. This time, I answered. "Ms. Quinn?" It was a different voice. Warmer, familiar. "Sonia Diaz here," she said. "The CTO of Meyerson Dynamics, my biggest client. I just heard the news. Is it true you've left?" "I have," I said, keeping my voice steady. "That's disappointing." She sounded genuinely upset. "Have you decided what's next?" I hesitated. "I have. I'll be joining Orion Technologies." There was a pause. "Good," Sonia said finally. "If Veridion thinks they can replace you with a call center, they're in for a surprise." I swallowed hard, my throat tight. "I appreciate that." "We'll be in touch," she said. "I'd rather work with people I trust." When we hung up, my hands were trembling. Not with fear this time. With hope. By the time I pulled up to Owen's school, the gray sky had cracked open into the faintest suggestion of sunshine. It was still cold, but somehow the air felt cleaner. Owen spotted me before I even got out of the car. He jogged up to the sidewalk, backpack bouncing. "You're early," he said, studying my face. I knelt to his level. "I am." "Did you quit your job?" I blinked. "How did you—" I heard you talking to Aunt Hannah last night. For a second, guilt pricked behind my ribs. So much of his life had been shaped by my work stress, my long hours, my fear of not being enough. I did, I admitted. But I already have a new one. A better one. Owen tilted his head. Will you be home more? I will, I said. And this time I felt the truth of it settle into my bones. Good, he said, with all the simplicity of an 11-year-old. You were always tired. I laughed and pulled him into a hug. That night, after Owen went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table and opened my laptop. My inbox was overflowing. Messages from clients, old colleagues, even a few Veridion employees who were quietly rooting for me. One subject line stood out: "Welcome to Orion." It was from Daniel. Inside was a single sentence: "Let us know when you're ready to start building something better." I closed my eyes, letting it sink in, because that's what this was. Not an ending, a beginning. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur. I returned the company laptop to to Veridion, on a rainy Tuesday morning. Karen didn't meet my eyes when I handed it over. I signed a final acknowledgement of return and walked out of that building for the last time. No tears, no regret, just relief. On my first day at Orion Technologies, Hannah met me in the lobby, grinning ear to ear. "Ready?" she asked. I nodded. Daniel greeted me with a handshake that felt more like a promise. He showed me to my new office, a bright space with big windows that overlooked the river. A real office, not a cubicle. I set Owen's picture on the desk first. That afternoon, I met the team I'd be leading. Some faces I knew, some I didn't. But all of them were energized, curious, willing to build. I realized I hadn't felt that in years. Within a month, I was fielding calls from clients who'd heard about my move. Meyerson Dynamics transitioned their entire account portfolio to Orion. Geller Systems followed, and then, quietly, a handful of other companies. I never once initiated those conversations. I didn't have to. Relationships matter. Trust matters. Veridion had never understood that. By the 6-month mark, Orion had grown our division by nearly 40%. Daniel pulled me aside after a quarterly meeting, smiling. "This is exactly why we wanted you here," he said. And for the first time in a long time, I believed it. At home, things changed too. I made it to Owen's science fair, front row, camera in hand. I started cooking dinner again. I slept through the night. One evening, about a year after I left Helix, I ran into Eric and Maria at a networking event. They'd both eventually followed me to Orion, tired of the uncertainty and the disrespect. Maria hugged me so hard I thought my ribs would crack. "You saved us," she said. "No," I said softly. "I just showed you there was another way." A few months later, the news broke that Veridion was shuttering the regional office. The outsourcing had been quietly abandoned after too many clients pulled their contracts. The leadership team was restructured. Too little, too late. I won't pretend it didn't feel satisfying. But that wasn't the real victory. The real victory was this. Every time I walked into Orion's offices, I felt respected, seen, valued. And when I came home at night, Owen didn't see a mother crushed by fear, but someone who'd finally learned her worth. If you're watching this and you're sitting at a job that makes you feel small, that tells you should be grateful for scraps. I want you to know something. You are not stuck. You are not powerless. Sometimes the best revenge isn't proving them wrong. It's proving yourself right. It's leaving the place that never deserved you and building something better, even if it starts with just one phone call.